Perfect. Hey, folks. Thanks for joining us today. I see everyone slowly trickling in. Welcome. Nice to have everyone join us today on this. At least we know now in Toronto, and BC seems to be sunny. I don't know. Hopefully it's sunny for many of you today as we sort of wrap up our week. So thanks for joining. We'll just wait another minute or so, and then we'll get started. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Perfect. All right. All right, so I think we can probably get a little bit started here. We have a few more people joining us, but to make sure that our wonderful presenters today have enough time and we have time for questions at the end, we are going to dive right in. So welcome everybody. My name is Hannah Holmes, pronouns she and her. I'm the project coordinator here at PLEAC, the Public Legal Education Association of Canada. I'm located here in Toronto, Ontario, and I would like to acknowledge the land that I and many others joining us today are on, and it's the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are very excited to hear from today's speakers. We have Jessica Sturrock, pronouns she, her, digital production manager, and Nora Bergh, pronouns she, her, assistant director in digital programs, joining us from Justice Education Society in BC. I will let them introduce themselves potentially a little bit longer than that, just momentarily, but just a few quick administrative notes on my end. So this webinar is being recorded. I will be uploading this as we do for all of our webinars to our YouTube channel. The link is going to be circulated to everyone afterwards. So please feel free to check that out or share that with anybody who maybe wasn't able to join today, or if you're curious to rewatch. There will also be a very brief survey at the end of the webinar, so please take a minute to complete it when you can. And finally, feel free to use the Q&A button or the chat function to ask any questions that you might have. You can ask them throughout the webinar. You can save them for the end. I will be keeping an eye on those, and we will nonetheless make sure to save about 10-15 minutes or at least some time at the end for Q&A and try to answer some of those questions, or if you have any comments or any feedback, those are also very welcomed. So I will stop on my end and pass it over to our lovely speakers today. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's session is on incorporating user testing to ensure user-centered design in your projects.
Right. I know, Hannah, you did one for your area, but I just wanted to take a moment to recognize where Jessica and I are today, and anyone from the Vancouver region. So I'm very honored to be able to work and live on the beautiful traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and that includes the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam nations. So who is JES? So JES, Justice Education Society, is a nonprofit organization with over 30 years of experience in the PLEI sector. Our vision is justice for all, and so we strive to do this through a number of different programs and projects. For our BC programs, we focus on building legal capability through education to specific groups such as youth, intermediaries, SRLs, immigrants, Indigenous communities, and vulnerable populations. For our digital programs, we create and maintain a number of public legal information websites and online courses that focus in specific legal areas. We also provide digital support for other organizations in the sector by creating websites, guided pathways, online dispute resolution platforms, and videos for them. And then our work internationally focuses on justice system capacity building, and we do a lot of training for justice professionals abroad.
Thanks, Nora. I'll take this opportunity to introduce myself. I'm Jessica Sturrock, the Digital Production Manager here at JESS. I've been working with the organization for the past 9 years. My background is in broadcast media, and over the past 6 years, I've transitioned into the project management and development of our websites and video projects.
Yeah, and I'm Nora. I'm the Assistant Director of BC and Digital Programs. I've been with the organization for the last 7, almost 8 years now. I have a legal background. I was called to the BC Bar in 2014. I worked as a PLEI content specialist for a number of years prior to moving into overseeing different programs and projects. All right, so today, what are we going to cover? We're going to talk about how user testing is an integral part of user-centered design. So just a little background of that, briefly talk about why user testing is important, go into how to choose the right methodologies and tools, and we'll walk through our 10-step process that we've created to conduct user testing.
So I would like to start out just by briefly defining user-centered design. It's a process to create a product that focuses on the needs, wants, and limitations of the users. And in our case, the product can be a program, legal resources, and legal content. The goal of user-centered design is to create products that are intuitive, effective, and enjoyable to use. And this is achieved by involving the users throughout the design process and incorporating their feedback. This is why user testing is such an integral step. There are a lot of foundational user-centered design concepts that have been thoroughly tested and researched. So reviewing this before you start your project is a really good starting point. And by starting your project by building the legal resources with these concepts in mind, you can focus your user testing on specific and unique parts of your project or program that maybe have more unknowns.
Yeah, so there's a number of tools you can use to get started to ensure that you're embedding user-centered design. So on the readability side, there's a great resource out there, betterlegalinfo.ca. It has testing checklists and guides on how to create good plain language content. I know there's lots of other ones out there from different jurisdictions. Everyone's doing a lot of great work in this field. And then there's, for readability, there's lots of readability checkers. So if you want to check your website, there's a number of them. You can Google them. I've used WebFXexpert.com. And then before you even get to publishing, so when you're creating content, Word has one. It's just the readability, the reading level, passive language, that kind of stuff will give you an indication where you're at. I also use sometimes Write Clearly plugin. It'll give you suggestions on how to reword certain problematic words or too long sentences. Again, this is just the stepping stones, the starting point. I wouldn't use this exclusively, but it's a good start.
And for the design perspective at the start of your project, there are some comprehensive reports and websites that you can use that publish some really interesting research, tools, and new interventions. So the first one here is the Legal Design Lab, and this is from the Stanford University. The next one is the Michigan Advocacy Program. They published a very comprehensive report in 2021 with strategies for user-informed design, user-informed legal design. and it's packed with helpful tips and tools and resources. The third one we have here is Google Analytics, and this is a web tool that will give you insights on your existing resources, your existing websites. It'll show how the users interact with your web content, how they navigate through your site, and it can give you some really good starting point information. Another really important thing to consider at the start is accessibility. WCAG, which stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, was developed to create a single shared standard web content accessibility guide. And so this is to make web content more accessible for people with disabilities. I also have Lighthouse here, which is a web application that you can run on your sites to review and see how you can improve your performance and accessibility of your web pages. This tool generates a report with recommendations on how to make improvements for your website.
All right, so what is user testing? Simply put, user testing is a method used to evaluate the usability, functionality, and the user experience of your product, service, system by observing how actual users are interacting with it.
So a really important question is why? Why should you do user testing? Well, it increases the quality of your legal resources and programs. The more you understand about your users and their needs, the more you will be able to meet their needs. It increases efficiency. So once you complete your testing, you will have data and evidence to base your decisions on. And it increases sustainability. So user testing results can highlight the needs and impacts. So data is really compelling, and you can use this data to show your funders and supporters how impactful your resources are. And it can make a higher chance that your resources are continued to be funded.
All right, so for the last few years, Jessica and I have been doing more and more user testing. So we've created our own 10-step process. And there's a lot of steps, but we'll go through it today with you. So step one is assessing the need. I really love data, and I really love doing user testing and learning a lot, but we can't always do it clearly. So it's really important to ask, does this project or program actually need user testing? So some of the factors you might consider that would indicate, yeah, you probably need some user testing is, are there lots of unknowns in this project? Is this a new area for you? For example, if you've been delivering services to adults and now you're going to pivot and deliver to youth, well, maybe you need to know a little bit more about this new user. You want to confirm the project is meeting its objectives. This is, of course, very important. So either you're going to be able to prove it to your funder that we're doing what we set out to do, or also adjust and make it better along the way. Changes. So have there been legislative or new science or new technology changes that have changed the landscape? We had a website, Families Change, that we developed 10 years ago or more, and it had a lot of it's age appropriate information for families going through separation. And so recently we just did a big user testing project on it to understand, because there's a lot of new science, there's new brain science on the ACEs, on the effects of divorce and separation on children and behavior. And there's also legislative changes and also the technology changes, especially for youth sites and kids sites. You got to keep up or it looks really dated. Yeah, and then the last thing, of course, is to demonstrate impact. Jessica covered this about the sustainability and the reason why doing it, but you want to show that these programs are needed and they're impactful.
And there are some cases where user testing just doesn't make sense or it isn't appropriate. So in those cases, if there are already a lot of existing research, then maybe user testing isn't needed, or you've already done user testing on some of your previous projects or programs, and you can transfer that knowledge across.
So lesson learned for step one, assessing need, is think about the user testing when you're making proposals and build it in. We found on projects where we built it in, the user testing, it's so much easier to get it done. Otherwise, you're a lot more limited.
Thanks, Nora. So our next step in the process is to establish user testing goals and objectives. And this is an extremely important step. You really need to create clear user testing goals and objectives because many of the following steps are going to refer back to these. And these steps identify major things. This step identifies major things that you're hoping to learn through user testing. So evaluation. So evaluate the usability of a service, program, or resource and identify if your users are having any issues or changes need to be made. Gathering feedback. So this is a user testing and gathering feedback is an opportunity to collect direct information from your users about their experience. Identifying areas that need improvement. So again, testing processes. So if a user needs to complete a form, test the process, make sure that the tools and features meet the needs of the user. Inform or confirm design decisions. So this is used to make sure that you're on the right track with your designs and validate assumptions.
An example is, if I want to test if my site or our site is gender inclusive. So my objective would be for the testing is to find out, is it gender inclusive in design, functionality, and content? And if not, how can it be? So what can I remove? What should be removed? What should be added? So have those goals in mind when you're creating your test.
So our lesson learned for step 2 is strong documentation. So strong documentation of the user goals and objectives is really, really important. Also setting realistic goals at the start and make sure your entire team is on the same page so that you're all working towards the same vision.
All right, step 3, define user testing scope and limitations. This is a pretty obvious one, but it's important. So likely you will have limitations. The obvious ones are, time limits. How much time do you have to complete your user testing to actually implement them and make changes? What's your budget like? That will determine how many experts can I afford, or what platforms I can use or tools. Defining your user. Know who you want to test and consider their limitations. Is there technology limitations? Is there location limitations or language barriers? And then, of course, you can't ignore your internal resources. Do I have the experts on the team, expertise to do this? Do I have the technology to support this, or what do I have?
Thanks. And yes, the lesson learned from this step is think about how you will recruit your users ahead of time. So users are at the center of the design process and user testing. So make sure you give your users enough time to complete the tests and plan into their schedules if it's a moderated session.
Step 4 is choose the timing. You can do user testing, at the beginning, in the middle, throughout, at the end. And sometimes you can will do it multiple times. So when you do it at the start, often you can think of projects where there's like a needs assessment or gathering requirements for a project that's sort of at the start. It's best when there's lots of unknowns, and you need more direction. You need some insight, some expertise on some of the key questions that are preventing you from getting started.
Next would be user testing throughout. So user testing in the middle of a project or throughout is best when you have a clear idea of the user needs. And there is still possibilities to make adjustments. So if you're too far down the through the process and you can't make adjustments, then doing a user test in the middle isn't going to be as helpful. This is also an opportunity to check if you're meeting the user's needs. So this doing testing throughout applies to design in the sense that you can test wireframes and prototypes to ensure your designs are intuitive and easy to use. And this can be done before you build the actual website. So very helpful in ensuring you're meeting your marks. Functionality testing, it's a great way to ensure if a process is working for a user. For example, if it's a 4-step process to fill out the form, is the user able to complete all 4 steps? And content testing, this is to check for understanding, plain language, and readability.
And last, you have after. So after a project is basically complete, maybe it was a big conference you put on, it's one-time thing, you test at the end, or it's just the evaluation of a project. This is important or best when you need to report on the outcomes, the impact, confirm that you did what you said you're going to do. But also when you can use that data to benefit future projects, whether it's, cross-project, a different project could use that information, or if it's, for future proposals, that's also useful.
Perfect. And our lesson learned for this step is utilize partnerships to minimize testing needs. So if you can work with others who have already done similar research, for your project or program, you can start out with the benefits of their insights.
Okay, halfway there. Choose this type of user testing. So choosing the method. There are lots of different types of user testing. So we're just going to go through a couple or a few that are very common, and we'll do kind of a pros and cons list for each. So surveys, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, have either filled it out or conducted them yourselves. They can be pre-session surveys or exit surveys or check-in surveys. Pros on, they're pretty affordable. They're cheap. They're usually free. It's fast and easy to construct them. You get a lot of quantifiable data, or you can with surveys. Easy to compare the data then, and you get the largest sample of users this way. Cons, it's less flexible. You can't really adjust it halfway through. Limited length. No one wants to fill out, a 5-page survey, so you got to keep them a bit shorter. There's often low return rates, and there's a lower depth of knowledge, less of the questions of why. Interviews, whether they're virtual, we've been doing more virtual recently, or one-on-one, phone-based. And the pros are sort of a lot of this is sort of the opposite of the survey. You can get a lot more qualitative data. You can get a deeper dive, get into things a little bit more deeply, and adjust as per the answers they're giving you. So it's an increased flexibility. If they give you an answer you didn't anticipate, you can pivot and ask more about that. And it's great at the start when there's lots of unknowns too, and you're exploring or utilizing expertise. It's more costly. It takes longer to do. And because of those, you're going to have a reduced sample size as well. And it is somewhat more difficult to compare the data.
Another example of methods is A/B testing. So this works really well when you have 2 or 3 ways to do something. So in this example here, we're just showing 2 different ways to display the information. And the pros of this is that it's pretty cost effective. You can quickly determine which option performs better, and your decisions are data driven. You'll end up with a clear winner, usually a clear winner, or a preference. The cons, it is limited insights, and there is additional time needed to create potential designs that aren't going to be used. Another option is mission and tasks. So a mission in the user testing context is a task that you provide your users to complete. So for example, you need to confirm that your users can find a resource or submit a form. The user testing mission will give instructions to the user, and the system will track their process, track their movements through the website, and provide results for you. So here in the upper corner is an example of a heat map of a user's mouse movement on the website. So clearly it took them a little bit longer to decide what to do. They were hovering here for a minute to make the decision. So this can be really invaluable information to know if maybe you need to adjust something, the wording, or make it more clear how to complete the step. The pros, it's more objective, better insight on the user journey, and it's very focused results. So with a task and outcome. It's more reflective of real life scenarios. So it's a really good way to confirm if the user is meeting the objectives. And some of the cons are it can be time consuming to set up the missions and review the data. And the scope can be a limited focus.
Yeah. And then there's focus groups. So those kind of the interview, but with more people. So again, it's qualitative data, and it's more cost effective because instead of doing one-on-one interviews with 8 people, you're just doing it once with all of them in the room. It provides more interesting perspectives. You're collaborating, they're bouncing ideas off of each other, and are able to respond to things that you might not have been able to reveal on a one-on-one interview. And it is also like a good opportunity to use it as a stakeholder buy-in. So you get your stakeholders as your focus group, and now they can become the champions of your service or product or site or whatever it is. The cons are you have to be conscious of sometimes in group settings, strong voices can dominate the session and aren't actually reflective of what everyone is thinking. It is difficult to schedule. And again, the data can be difficult to compare or quantify.
So our lesson learned from this step is it's best to diversify your testing methods. So we, summarized a few options here, and they all have pros and cons. So it's really good to try to incorporate a couple different methods to ensure your data is well-rounded.
Right. Step 6, choosing the questions. So creating those questions. The first thing I do usually is refer back to the goals. Like, what am I trying to achieve, and am I going to get there with these questions? And then you want to think about, do you want qualitative or quantitative questions? I generally like to do a mix. It's great to be able to show, 4 out of 5 users 80%, love it 80% or whatever it is. Graphs are powerful, numbers are powerful, but also getting that deeper dive and understanding the whys and hows is really valuable. I try to avoid lots of open-ended questions, but I will throw one in sometimes. At the end, any other thoughts or comments on the site? There's things that I didn't think of as the interviewer ahead of time, and so new information can come to light. And avoid leading questions. Avoid the only yes no answers. If you're going to do a yes no, it's always good to add that gray area of I don't know, or this is not applicable. That way your data doesn't get skewed. So consistent metrics. We generally use a 5-point scale. It's pretty easy, but the main thing to note is not to switch to a 4-point. Some questions are 4-point, or a later survey that you're doing has a different metrics. Sometimes when we work in partnerships with other organizations that they're doing their own survey as well, and we're going to share the surveys, and they're running on a 4-point scale, well, maybe I'll adjust to theirs as well, just to make it a lot easier for us to compare the data. Demographics. It's a good idea to collect some demographics. If I just ask, how useful was this session, and 80% of users said it was useful, but it was actually of the participants, new immigrants found it to be 30% useful. Well, that's really important information, and if I don't capture data or demographics, I'm missing that piece, and I can make the session probably better if I know that data. Though a note is that we have found sometimes people are resistant to offering that information, and that's okay. And a lot for that one-on-one service, sometimes explaining why we're collecting that data will really ease people's minds. And it's not that we're not going to provide service if you don't answer this question correctly. It's to make the services better. When you have a chance to do multiple user testing, it's great. And then you can put in a follow-up question. So in the first survey or the first interview, I asked, would you be willing to be interviewed or do a survey in the next few months? And they provide their email, and that's lovely. I don't have to recruit so much for the next round. And I can also measure impact there. Number of questions. Respect people's time is key. Nobody wants to fill out really, really long surveys. For after sessions, we typically do 5-ish questions. But this might change if I'm, paying someone to participate, or I'm doing a long interview with an expert. Then of course it's going to be longer and more in depth. But that makes sense for that situation. And last is to review internally your questions. If I'm creating, I'm like, I'm not sure about this wording. Does this make sense? It makes sense to me. I check in with a coworker or a family member. Like, what do you think? What do you think of this question? And then that'll be helpful. You don't want to find the wrong answer to that question, down the road after you've done it. So that's basically our lesson learned, as well as to be agile. So adjust as you go if you can. We had a situation where we were testing design. I think it was on a desktop designs, and everyone was answering the question in a way that we didn't expect. And we looked at it and they were really struggling with this question. We're like, is the task difficult, or was it the wording? And so we tried, when we tested for mobile, the same question, but changed the wording, and that really fixed that problem. So when you're able to do look in and revise and pivot.
Thanks, Nora. So the next step is choosing the tools. So we've summarized a few of the tools that we use in our user testing. The first one here is Google Forms. So the nice thing about Google Forms is that it's free, and you can simply add, fillable fields. You can add multiple choice, and the responses are gathered within the platform, and the data is displayed in compelling ways with pie charts and graphs, and it can be used to make some really good reports. So yeah, you can make a series of fill in the blank questions and answers. It's easily integrated into other apps such as Excel, Drive, and Docs. And something else that we found is very helpful is you can send out a link or use a QR code to share the form through presentations or email. SurveyMonkey is essentially very similar to Google Forms, but it's more feature rich. So it does come with a monthly or annual fee, and you can customize. There's just more options for customization on the types of questions, the formats, the way it looks. So you can really make some really engaging forms. It has a stronger data analysis, and you can compare and isolate data with the results, and customize graphs to make them look really visually compelling. Maze, this is a really cool tool that we came across about a year ago, and we've used it on multiple projects now. It's a user testing platform that can be used to test prototypes and live existing websites. So with the prototypes, you can install it right into your design software, and the users get an opportunity to test the web pages as they would be if they were real web pages that were already built. So it's really nice that you get to do that testing before you go into the development process, and it creates the same user experience that the users would have if they were really on the website. This program tracks users' data as they move through the program. So these are different missions, different tasks that they complete. And some of the things that you can test with this is concept and idea validation, wireframe and usability testing, content copy testing, feedback satisfaction, and again, live website testing.
Great. Yeah, and good old pen and paper. Sometimes technology is not your friend. It's actually a barrier to getting your user testing done. We found in one of our programs, an Indigenous program, where it just was a barrier. People weren't filling it out, and so we had a simple exit ticket where we asked 2 simple questions: what did you learn, and how can it be improved? And we got a lot of information out of that helped shape the program that we probably wouldn't have been able to gather as seamlessly if we had tried to push for the technology tool. Also, when you're conducting interviews, you're going to have a pen and paper or the digital version of that to have a script, and you're following it, and you want to document everything and keep track of it. Then there's polls. You can do this during a webinar to sort of, we do this sometimes to check in the level or the understanding, or how is the level for people? Do they have lots of knowledge on this topic already? Are we hitting the mark here, or should we adjust as we're going along? And then there's the video conferencing, and obviously we've been able to do this a lot more in the last couple of years. One, it allows you to record the session, but it also allows, when you're doing an interview through a video conferencing, you can get them to share their screen. So if they're reviewing a website or a design, then you're watching them and their screen and how they're interacting with that site. And so you're gathering some data that is that nonverbal data that you might have missed if it's just a survey and you're not able to observe it. And it's a little bit cheaper than using a platform like Maze or other platforms that do that recording. Yeah, and then another tool, it's sort of the tool that we use to enable user testing. So a scheduling tool. We already had this tool. We use You Can Book Me for scheduling groups and different sessions. And so we thought, hey, we could utilize this to do our user testing, and it cuts down on the admin cost of emailing back and forth and finding a time that works for everyone. You know, it syncs right to your calendar, so it only provides availabilities that are in your calendar. It's affordable, and it also sends out automated emails, so reminders. You know, this was a great savings for us.
Awesome, thanks, Nora. So we have summarized some of the tools that have really helped us, but I think a lesson learned here is try to repurpose existing tools that you're already using. There are a lot of comparable things out there that do similar things to what we've described above, and you may already have access to them. You just sort of need to think about using them in new creative ways. So yeah, that is our lesson learned. So this is an important step, conducting the user testing. So we've sort of gathered some of our tips and helpful tricks. So we're gonna go through some of those right now. To start out, just make it as easy as possible for people. You know, before you start, test it out. Test out your process, test out the technology, make sure that everything's connecting properly and there's less glitches.
Oops, go back.
Sorry.
Yeah. Incentivize users. So you know, sometimes it's hard to get people to fill out your user testing or be a part of it. So things we found that have been helpful is, you know, telling people why it's important. You know, letting them know, you know, they're doing free session on something, and you know, like, the feedback is really important to help continue to fund these types of programs. People are very receptive to that. We've also found that when we set aside time during a session for that user feedback, for them to actually fill in the user feedback, you're going to get way more responses than a follow-up email. You don't get a lot of responses that way. Honorariums are, I think, very important. Generally, we want to compensate people for their lived experience. They're sharing personal stories. You know, we want to be respectful of that. You know, obviously, sometimes your budget doesn't allow for a lot. So another way is to do a draw. I like to do this more for you know, intermediaries or professionals, that they can, you know, enter into a draw, or for students, and for a prize if they fill out the survey, and that really incentivizes people.
Thanks. Be organized. Share the important information ahead of time. Sometimes people who are going to do a user testing session can be nervous. So as better that you can prepare them and remove any unknowns, it makes the process go a lot easier, and let them know how long it's going to take and what there is to expect.
Yeah, don't overwhelm them. You know, simple, ask questions one at a time. Don't make the missions too complicated. Yeah.
And another great thing is make it a welcoming environment. Sort of state that there's no wrong answers. All feedback is good feedback, taking their time. And again, helping them understand how valuable this information is and how it helps make the product or program better.
Yeah, and lastly, trying to minimize bias. So, have a script, record the session and track. Don't paraphrase what people are saying, actually track exactly what they're saying. Be better. Yeah, so for a lesson learned, I already sort of covered it, is explaining how impactful their feedback is and how it will be used, is really key, and sort of incorporating them into, sort of feel like they're part of something bigger. They're part of this program, that they're part of the change, and that usually it gets us a lot of buy-in. All right, step 9, analyzing the results. So this is the fun part. When you get all your data in. And so I like to, when possible, or, consider demographics. I've already sort of covered it and talked about why it's important. And certain tools will allow you to isolate the information, and then you can consider specific factors there. And so using tools, SurveyMonkey helps you isolate questions, isolate data, but so does Excel. If you take some time, you can learn how to do pivot tables. They're not as scary as they sound. So yeah.
Awesome. And then creating a report with recommendations. So after you've analyzed your findings, generate a report with the information. And this helps you make data-driven decisions, clear recommendations. There's more transparency for sharing, and you can also share the information with others in the sector, which can be really helpful. And this also keeps a record of your findings for your next project. So here, no need to read over this. This is an example of a report. It is including the methodology we used, some of the questions and recommendations. And at times, the recommendation might be that there is no change needed. So that at times should be documented.
Yeah, so our lesson learned is identifying where data is inconclusive and additional testing is needed. So don't be afraid to showcase where they may have been a miss or a mistake, or you just don't have the answer. Knowing what you don't know is powerful. Yeah.
Awesome. And the last step, which doesn't need a lot of explanation, is implementing the recommendation. So after you produced your report, implement the recommendations given. And at times, you may learn something in the process that makes need to reconsider some things, or the recommendations may be out of scope for the particular project. So it's good to keep those things documented so that potentially in a later phase, or you can come back later to address those recommendations at a later date. And again, the best practice would be to go through the entire process again. Now that you have produced your resources, or you've completed a program, if you have the opportunity, it's not always possible, but if you can go through the steps again, testing the current version of your project or program, you're going to continue to find information that will better the experience for the user. And lessons learned. I sort of just went over that, but strategically pick which recommendations you implement. So yeah, sometimes there's too many options, too many recommendations, and it's just important to filter through and implement the most important ones.
Great. Yeah, so those are our 10 steps that we like to go through. I guess, thank you. And if there's any questions, we'll open it up to questions now.
Thank you so much, Nora and Jessica. That was great. We do have a question here in the Q&A, and a few here We do have 10 minutes as well. So if anyone has questions, comments, please feel free to add them in the Q&A or the chat. So we do have our first question, thoughts on honoraria. How much usually should people who are there as part of their job be paid?
As part of their job. It really depends on how much you have on your budget. We've done between, as low as 20 to, depending, if it's part of their job. So depending how much time I'm asking of them as well. We've done extensive interviews with people that are quite experts. So for them, I think it was a couple of hundred. But again, the budget allowed for that. There's also been times where, I will be happy to fill out a survey. It's part of my job, if any PLEI agency asks for our insight, I'm happy to do that. And I'm conscious and aware that there are budget constraints. So it's like, I want other projects to thrive. So I'm happy to do that for intermediaries. I've also done a lot of survey, like poll, what are those, draw, you pull out of the name or draw, and there's a prize. It's like a $50 or $100 prize, but then I can, if I gather 30, I don't have $300, but yeah.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, great. And then, so next question, do you have a pool of testing participants or do you usually recruit when needed? This question is more for usability testing interview.
I think, again, it is very specific on the project. For example, we worked on a project with the Vehicle Sales Authority, and we needed to test specifically with dealers, people who work within the car dealership. So in that scenario, we needed to go to like a niche place to find those users. There are other methods such as Craigslist, Facebook, using your own internal network through your organization that you can find people that will fit the needs of that particular project.
Mm-hmm. And I think on Maze as well, they do the recruiting. So there is sort of a database. It's not ours. We don't actually sort of have a formal database. Yeah.
And yeah, Maze, you can set some pretty amazing criteria of the types of users that you want to find. And they have a really, really large database of people all over North America. So you can get some larger samples of people, which can help sort of validate the data you're looking for.
Perfect, thank you. And then what is your experience when dealing with youth for testing? What method of testing would be best?
Youth, we did a lot of surveys, short, quick surveys with a prize, tends to get them involved. Youth can be very opinionated, so that you can use that, especially they tend to be a lot, or in my experience, they're a lot more shy in a big group setting. So, one-on-one interviews can work. They are time consuming, and sometimes there can be trust issues as well that takes time to build that relationship with the youth if they're not that comfortable with an adult or the user testing situation. So the easiest and cheapest is survey, and then sometimes you can work with a teacher, and they provide a couple of students, and so it's a smaller group that you can work with and get some feedback there. That's sort of how we've done it.
Awesome. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And then thanks for everyone's questions, by the way. So how beneficial is it to user test experts interviewed from the start of a program throughout or at the end?
I think personally, I found that experts are really useful at the beginning, because they give that insight that really provides the direction that you want to base. Like they've done all the research and they have the sort of technical research data to base some of your decisions on. So earlier on, knowing that is good. Also, experts are at least I can say this because I'm a lawyer, but like lawyers can be very opinionated, and getting them to review content, when it's like near the end, it can be challenging because they'll be nitpicky about the wording, and not in a legally accurate way where it's like, I prefer to say it this way, and they'll share those opinions, and there's a time and place for that. And sometimes at the end, it's just you don't have time for that.
Great. Thank you. All right. And then does Jess provide, or Jay, yes, I would say Jess provide consulting services, consulting services to do user testing of third-party PLEAC?
Yeah, we do. We definitely do a lot of work with other organizations, whether it's for user testing or digital development. Yeah, we're always happy to work with others.
Fantastic. I see that that's an open call. So
please reach out. No.
Exactly. No, and then just on that note, if anyone does want to obviously connect with Nora or Jessica here, we definitely have those emails and the contacts to sort of help bridge that, if that's helpful. But thank you for that question. And then finally, or actually we do have a few more minutes if anything else trickles in, but in your experience, to facilitate really well researched successful user testing, how many roles or team members do you need?
Sorry, I'm gonna have to give that awful example of like, it depends. So it depends on the level of expertise. We've been fortunate to be able to, for some projects, be able to use an individual, like an expert, who has it all, who has the legal knowledge, is a lawyer and an evaluator, and that really cuts down on the work for us. Working with someone who has the knowledge of user testing, but not the content or the sector knowledge, is a lot more work on you. We have a fairly small team, and we're a nonprofit, so we've done it from the smallest scale where it's like 2 of us doing it, or 1 of us, to 5 of us. But we're never going to compete with like a private expert user testing firm who's going to have a whole team to do it. I don't know. Anything you want to add to that, Jess?
Yeah, and I think also the timing of the project plays a role as well. Like if it's a very compressed timeline, you may need to sort of like add more team members in, or other services. Like there are agencies that you can work with that sort of take on this role and do facilitate the testing. But so I guess, yeah, timing would be a factor in scaling that team as well.
Awesome. Okay. And I have, maybe we can fit in one more question here. Do you have any tips or best practices for how to manage dominant voices in focus groups? Have you experienced this before, and how have you dealt with that?
Just being very conscious of it and calling out like that. Obviously that can be uncomfortable, but you just check in, and that's true in any sort of meeting that you're in, and being aware of who hasn't talked and being like, what do you think? Like, do you have anything to add? X person, their name, and see, instead of doing like an open call of like, does anyone have anything to add? That's a lot scarier to stand up and voice. But if someone's talking straight to me, then I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I do have something to say.
And also just setting the stage at the start for creating that open opportunity for everyone, and that time is limited. So we may need to like moderate the answers in a way. So.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nora and Jess here. I'm just looking, and I think that's all of the questions we have at the moment. We have 1 minute sort of left to go, so our timing is amazing today. I'm sure everyone has sort of other meetings and things to get to, so I appreciate it. I just do want to say thank you so much to both of you, our wonderful speakers, for the incredibly sort of helpful and informative presentation. We are obviously very grateful for your time today, and I'm sure everyone here will sort of walk away having learned quite a few new things, I'm sure. Or if anything, there's more questions or any other comments or feedback, please feel free to reach out to me, or I will sort of provide both Nora and Jess's emails after, if that's okay, if anyone has any follow-up questions. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today as well. I know everyone's sort of keeping busy, so I appreciate it. The recording, again, just to mention, will be uploaded and circulated with everyone shortly. And if you have any questions, again, like I said, just feel free to reach out and we can help with any of those connections or help answer any of those inquiries that you might have. Otherwise, I think we're good to go. Thanks again. Have a lovely rest of your week, everyone. Have a lovely weekend as well. And see you next time. Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
so much
Thank you
for
so
the
much.
opportunity.
Of course, thank you. Bye.